Welcome. This is Julina Ogilvie, and this is the 87th episode of Women on Wealth. And the title of today's topic is End of Life Planning for Peace of Mind. And who better to have this conversation with than with a funeral planning specialist? So I have with me today Brian Cimbak. Brian, hi, welcome.
Hi, Julina. Thank you for having me on.
No, this is exciting. Like I just said to you, I have not touched this topic yet in the 3 years that I've been doing this. So I'm excited to have this conversation. And this is going to be slightly morbid, but I guess that's what we're talking about today. We are recording this at year end, and I know a lot of us, as we approach year end, we get together for the holidays with our family. And a lot of times we haven't seen our loved ones for a while, and you have this aha moment of, oh wow, they're not as they're struggling more than they have in the past, and you start to have these conversations with family. So I'm thrilled that you were able to join me for this discussion at year end.
Perfect.
And
Well, again,
let
thank
me
you for having me.
know. And so I'm going to ask you two questions. So number one, you have to first explain how you got into this business, because if you're not watching this on YouTube, you are very young. You have what, a 4-year-old
I got a 4-year-old and a almost 2-year-old.
and
Yeah.
an almost 2-year-old.
I'm
So
only
how did you
34
get it?
years old. So, yeah.
I mean, I wasn't going to ask your age, but there you go. So how did you get in the business?
It's a long, convoluted story, but I grew up I'm half Italian, half Czech, Italian on my mom's side. And growing up from a big Italian family in Bridgeport, she was one of the youngest of the nieces and nephews. So when I was growing up in the 90s and, I was a kid in the 90s and even through the early 2000s, we were going to funerals for either family members or friends of the family or friends of my grandfather's or friends of neighbors, whoever.
Yeah.
Um, and, for me, it was always a part of life. It was always, all right, I got to come home. I got to do my homework, eat dinner quick, because then we got to go to the funeral home. We're going to be there from 4 to 8. And then I'm going to come home and go to
Wow.
sleep, get up, go to school the next morning. So I was always around it, as I like to say. I joke I grew up in it. I have no family who owns one, but I had a good family friend, who became a friend over the years, handle the majority of my family. So just seeing them, seeing the respect behind it, and always been curious, the curiosity behind it,
Yeah.
kind of got me into it. And
Okay.
I
Wow.
like helping people, and it's a great way to be able to be there at their time of need.
Yeah. Well, I say this all the time on this podcast. It's amazing how childhood experiences create who we are.
Yeah.
So, no, I appreciate that. And second question is, what is a funeral pre-planning specialist?
So pretty much what it is what we do is we help people make the decisions that they ultimately would be making either at the time of for a spouse, a loved one, family member. We just kind of make sure and we help them get it done now. And then in addition, we help them, like the title mentioned, bring peace of mind to
Yeah.
the fact that we give them the options of what type of services they want. We can plan everything out. If they have no idea of what they want, but they just want to financially take care of it, we help them with that too. Ultimately, I will have families who leave here after meeting with me and they'll say, wow, this was you answered all of our questions. We're so glad that we able to do this now. We have all of our wishes on paper. We paid for it, so now our kids don't have to worry about it, because as we all know, we don't pass on when it's convenient for us or for our family.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, it's just one of those things. It's I'm an Eagle Scout, so be prepared. It's always good to be prepared, and this is one of the best ways you can, because unfortunately, dying is a part of life, and we're all going to do it. So
And and that's the goal of this podcast for the listeners, is being as prepared as possible and in a lot of different ways. So I appreciate that. And I'm going to ask a follow-up question, sorry,
certainly.
before we get into it. But are you employed by a funeral home, or are you independent? How does that work?
So how it works is two ways. So we have a group, the group that we work with. We actually reach out to funeral homes
Okay.
and we we'll try to help them if so. A lot of funeral homes, they have at need, which is when people actively pass and you got to deal with that. And then they have what's called pre-need. So which is what I do, the pre-planning special, pre-planning and all that. So what we do is we'll reach out to funeral homes and be like, listen, if you need help with your pre-needs, we could help take that off your plate.
Okay.
And we have really good relationships with numerous funeral homes all across the state of Connecticut. Kind of to go back to your original point, we work with everyone.
Okay.
And so we have particular homes in certain towns that we would recommend. We have really good relationships with, but I'm with funeral homes all across, Hampden, all the way up to Waterbury, all over the place.
So it's a
So
Connecticut license you have access to.
correct, yeah. So and then what we do too is for people who don't have any funeral home preferred, or if they just wanted to say they came into your office and, hey, I want to get it all set financially taken care of. I don't want to make any decisions right now. I can do that as well. I have a, life insurance license as well as a funeral director's license. So I can discuss all that, get that all set and, get it situated so it becomes a protected asset for them.
Got it. All right. So I have a ton of questions for you, and I don't know if we're going to get through them all. So I'm going to try and kind of prioritize in my mind. But
Certainly.
let's start with this whole pre-planning notion. So can you walk through some of the importance of early planning, and I guess why should be discussing this matter so early, and
Great
when is
question.
early?
Yeah, no, great question. And I get that quite often. Again, I'll give you a little personal experience. When my grandparents were getting up there, getting elderly, my mom couldn't be bothered with it. A lot of people, she was old school Italian. You don't want to think about it because if you think about it, the next thing you know, it's going to happen. And
Mhm.
she didn't want to do it. So they ended up on, my grandparents ended up on Title 19. So we had to spend down their assets in order to meet the Title 19 qualification. One of the easiest ways to do that is to set up a funeral. So we set it up. I kind of took it upon myself to make all the decisions, being in the business. I picked up the casket, the vault, the prayer cards, everything. And then when my grandmother passed in 2022, it was a huge relief for my mom, because she came in, she gave me a hug and she thanked me afterwards. And she said, I didn't want to think about it then, but I'm glad you did all of that because now I'm able to focus on grieving. I've been in the business 14 years, and you always have a lot of families who come in to make that at need arrangement conference when someone has just passed, and they're looking at you and they're listening and they're writing everything down, and then over the next 24 hours they call a couple different times and they ask a question that was already covered, but they weren't focusing on it. They weren't focused. They were hearing you, but they weren't really necessarily paying attention because the grief was taking over. So I always tell people a lot of times it's uncomfortable, but get a plan in place. Get at least an idea if even if it's the basic of do I want to be buried, do I want to be cremated, and get that set. Let somebody know, either a child, a neighbor, a friend, let them know that you have a plan. If you have a funeral home, reach out to them. If you don't, at least get ideas and stuff on paper because in the event something tragic happens, now everyone's left with, well, what did they want to do? Well, I don't know what they want to do. And I've seen it too, where sometimes it comes down to a financial choice of, well, she might have wanted this, but we could only afford this, so let's do that. So this way, if you get it all set ahead of time, you're giving your family peace of mind and you're giving them a benefit that they can now grieve without having to stress about decisions or finances, etc. It's just they could be there and be there for you and for
Okay.
themselves and whatnot.
Yeah.
I I had one real quick. I had one family. I met with them here, and they were they were so glad we were able to do this. They were actually from Westport, and they're like, "We're so glad we're able to do this." The wife looks at the husband. She goes, "You're set. I'm set." She goes, "You know what? Can't wait to have the kids over for Sunday dinner. We're going to give them a copy of everything right here and say, here we go. You don't have to worry." So a lot of times, once people get through the, oh man, I'm planning my own funeral kind of notion,
Yeah.
it's a huge stress relief for them as well, because now it's, oh, I know when I go, everything's going to be done exactly how I want it,
Absolutely.
and my kids don't have to worry about anything.
And how early is early for, like, for example, that couple?
Yeah, I mean, I always tell people, I always joke. I mean, my father-in-law, he just retired. He's 68, and I always say, hey, maybe you should have your funeral prepaid.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
my
Yep.
my wife's in the business too, so obviously he's
Oh
he's used
gosh.
to us always talking about that. But yeah, so it's just one of those things where I always kind of the golden age for it is, I would say, late 60s to about mid 70s, and even too, people are living a lot longer
Yeah.
these days. So, I have my wife's grandparents are 97. They planned 10 years ago,
Wow.
So,
Well, and I want that to be a question going forward and when we start talking about cost and things like that.
yeah, certainly.
And what are some common misconceptions and maybe fears around this end of life planning?
I mean, a lot of the fear, I not necessarily know of any misconceptions, but a lot of the fear is just you have to face that reality that you are going to eventually pass away someday.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just a lot for people to do. I mean, I've had families come in where they get halfway through it and they go, wow, you know what? This is a little overwhelming.
Yeah.
you know
I'm sure.
and I will say a lot of times too, you do get people who, I mean, I'll go to people's houses, I'll sit with them at their houses and discuss all of this. They'll get to the point too where they just don't want to come into the funeral home. Sometimes just coming into a funeral home is very stressful and nerve-wracking. I had one woman I was dealing with, and the whole time she was like fidgeting because she's like, oh, it's just this place creeps me out. I'm like, I understand. So, there's a group that we work with, who we do, the financial side with, and they did a study, and of their study, top 4 or 5 places of where people want to discuss their funeral arrangements. And I'll shoot you a question. Can you guess where the funeral home was on that list?
It was not up there, was it?
It was number 4.
It was number four. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what were the top three then?
The top 3: church, lawyer's office, estate planning office, or just, family member or friends. They'd
Okay.
rather just sit down with them and discuss it. And, the church and clergy was typically number one. A lot of people go for, whatever religion they are, they go to their spiritual leader and say, what do you recommend? What should I do? This is what I'm leaning. Um,
That
yeah,
makes
and
sense.
yeah, exactly. And then, the second, you got estate planning and
Yep.
financial planners saying, all right, hey, look, well, if you live this long, well, okay, well, what about the funeral? What should I set aside for the funeral? Because it's, as you and I were discussing when we first met, it's something that it's an expense that people need to plan for at the end of their life.
Absolutely. And especially if they want to do it the way they want to do it.
Exactly. Yeah,
So let's talk a little bit about some of the key financial considerations. So can you
certainly.
break down some of these costs for us?
Yeah, certainly. So, being in Connecticut, as I'm sure everyone knows, we are quite above the national average on most everything. Electricity, we're second highest in the country, I think. Groceries, we're up there. Gas, I think we're starting to come down. Who knows? But everything in Connecticut is just more expensive. That's where we are. So the numbers I give are typically always higher than the national average,
Okay.
because they take those national averages from Oklahoma and Kansas. And, it's like, okay, well, that's Midwest, kind of Southern. It's a little different up here. So if you wanted, say, I could give you a full breakdown in detail of kind of the 4 options that we would use, or the 5 options most people use. A direct cremation, which is just, you pick up the deceased, bring them back into the funeral home care, get the necessary permits and paperwork, go from there. Connecticut, especially Fairfield County, you're averaging anywhere between 5 to 6 thousand, if not a little higher. Typically, you're getting around the 6.5, 7 mark for direct cremation. It's a little, up there, but On average, you can expect at least, 5,500 to six easy.
Okay.
And then when you have what's called, cremation with a memorial service, where the cremation, takes place, and then you either have, calling hours, either a morning of with the urn present, or at a mass, and then burial in a cemetery. That you again, Connecticut slash Fairfield County area, you're looking more around, the 8 to 9 ballpark.
Yep.
With the final more option of what we call a traditional cremation, you could have a full layout of the body present. You have the embalming take place, a viewing, calling hours the night before, and then the next morning, church or memorial service at the funeral home. After that, then the cremation would take place. So you wouldn't be going to a cemetery. Something like that. Again, you'd be looking at the same ballpark, in the ballpark 10 to 12.
Okay.
And I mean, it could get up there if you don't have, and as far as burial goes, you could have a morning of. With that, you'd be looking at about, again, 10,000. If you're looking at full traditional service, wake the night before, mass, or some sort of religious service, and then a burial the next morning, you could be ballpark 13 to 15, again, depending on casket selection. The biggest thing, I actually just helped a 85-year-old woman a couple weeks back. She didn't have any, she didn't have a cemetery plot. So the cemetery, she prepaid for everything. You got to buy the plot, you got to buy this, you got to, so the cemeteries themselves can be quite pricey. You got to buy the grave itself, which is just the land.
Yep.
Then you have to pay for the opening and closing at the time of, the passing. You have what's called perpetual care. They usually, some cemeteries have that where they'll take care of the grounds. That's kind of a one-time fee.
Gotcha.
So that in itself, say if you have a traditional $12,000 funeral, now you're adding 4 to 5 thousand for the cemetery on top of it. So I always tell people, if you're starting right from the bottom and you don't have plots, you don't have a grave, you don't have anything, I would always recommend 17 to 20,000 to
Yeah, it
put
sounds like
away.
20 is the number, right?
Yeah. And you know what the thing is too, is that with inflation, if you put a little extra, if the families can, I always tell my families, put in an extra 500 to 1,000, because the cemeteries, no funeral home in the state of Connecticut guarantees their cash advances, which is what the cemetery fee is on that side of the contract.
Okay.
So and it's because we have no control over those fees. The cemetery is independent of any funeral home. They could raise their fees tomorrow if they want, and then raise them again a week from now. They typically will raise them usually once a year, usually by the cemeteries across the border, about $100 to $200.
Okay.
So
Got it. And are there any legal fees involved?
as far as just setting everything up, there's not.
Okay.
You wouldn't have to do anything like that.
Yeah.
You would come in, surprisingly, this great state of tax Connecticut. There's no tax on a funeral contract
Okay.
unless you hit over a certain amount. But unless you're buying like Michael Jackson level casket, or
Okay.
very, very high end, burial vault or casket, you wouldn't hit that. So.
Okay. Okay. And if you're doing this pre-planning at a cemetery or with a funeral home, are you locking in the rates that year, or can that change if you're planning 10 years ahead of time, let's say?
So that comes down to each individual funeral home. Typically, what will happen is some funeral homes will lock in their services and merchandise, which means whatever they are today's price, they're locked in. So say the person passes 10 years from now,
Yep.
whatever that is, that's it.
Okay.
No funeral home will lock in, as far as I'm aware, their cash advance items, because the church will go up, the cemetery could go up.
Yep.
The newspapers, we try to steer people away from putting stuff in the newspaper, only because the newspaper has gone up astronomically over the past 5 to 7 years. And most funeral homes put it online on their website anyway. It's a lot quicker to share it. So yes, some do, some don't. Every funeral home does that. What we kind of do when we are, meeting with a family, if we recommend them to our funeral home, one that we have a good relationship with. Say I'm meeting with somebody here in Fairfield, and I'll say, hey, go to Spear Miller, or I'll just send this to Spear Miller. What they will do is they lock in their services and merchandise.
Okay.
And again, because it's a good thing for the family. There is another funeral home I work with. They do the same thing also. But again, I do know of one that doesn't. And
Okay.
they're just, hey, no, that's it, it comes down to their personal preference, really.
Sure. Absolutely.
Um, but when we always try to steer somebody, if they're meeting with someone, if they're meeting with us and they don't have a funeral home picked out,
Yeah.
we always will, say we'll go to the funeral home. It's a good opportunity for us to make an introduction to that funeral home and to kind of help them get involved and, get involved with us. But we always tell them, hey, look, we met with this person. This is what it is. If I just showed up to your doorstep with 20 grand, if it was just, say one funeral, you should do the right thing and, just try to make it all work. So,
Right. Okay. That's great.
yeah.
And what about how does the role of life insurance play into this?
So what um, we use a group called Funeral Directors Life, as well as a couple other different life insurance groups. There are funeral specific life insurance companies in the group in the country. So we will kind of pick and choose based on what's best for the family, which one is more beneficial. The
Okay.
one that I mentioned, we always like to lead with, I personally would like to lead with is it's a great one because what it does is it helps with rate of return. So it's not treated like a traditional life insurance policy.
Okay.
It is technically is more geared as towards like a funeral trust in Connecticut. The state of Connecticut, just to give you a little segue onto this, how it works in the state. Any money that comes into any funeral home, they have a certain time frame to turn that over to a Connecticut approved third party escrow agent. That escrow agent could either be a funeral specific insurance company or a trust company. We use this funeral specific insurance, and here's pretty much why. It has a higher rate of return than any of the trusts we've seen, because a lot of the trusts do have a good rate, but then after taxes and then after fees,
Yeah.
you do get taxed on the trust. You get a 1099 every year on any interest gained. Some places will say, all right, well, instead of, and I've had some families say this, instead of me writing a check for the taxes, why don't you just take it out of the growth? So now this high growth is now actually a low growth because it's gotten in from that. So the nice thing about the insurance is it's tax-free income, and it does have the higher growth rate of the methods that we use. So when somebody pre-plans 10 years in advance, that money gains year over year over year over year.
And what's considered a good growth rate for this?
Um, so a good growth rate for this is typically in the range of about 2.5 to 2.85%,
Okay.
2.5 to 3 in that ballpark.
Okay.
The sweets number is, typically around the 2.85. And the reason being is because these things do grow a lot differently. I being in Westport, Fairfield County, Fairfield, I've had some families come in and they say, well, that's it. My investment portfolio is
Sure.
gaining, 12, 14, whatever it is percent.
Yeah.
And when my family, when the time comes, my family will just worry about it. Well, that's good, but most funeral homes require payment by the day of.
Okay.
So unless you're able to pull that out instantly, the benefit of this and having it pre-funded is now your family doesn't have to start going through all your, contacting your
Yeah.
investment or wealth management person, trying to pull this out, trying to get it done in time. It's done, it's handled with, and it actually does become a protected asset. The way we set them up, they become Title 19 compliant with the state. So it keeps the family in control of the money. And it also, say, if they end up in a nursing home, now they're blowing through the money that was in their retirement account. for their care at the nursing home, private pay, for example, in some of the places in Fairfield County, they're 20 grand a month
Wow.
for private care in that ballpark.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of places that, people don't understand that you could have 1 million in the bank and you're okay, we're fine.
Yeah.
But it could blow by really quick if you end up having a bad fall and now you're permanently in a nursing home.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and I think like a lot of types of investments, insurance, annuities, retirement, it's all about taking into consideration your family needs, your financial needs, and you know, to your point, it's like that's how you customize this, right?
Yeah.
So trying to find that was not my easy way of making a segue, but that was the attempt. So I was trying to segue into talking a little bit more about the role of a life planning consultant. In your role, how can you assist in creating a comprehensive plan for your clients?
Oh, that's easy. We literally, our goal number one is to listen. So we listen. We want to make sure we fully understand their wishes. We want to make sure that we understand what it is that they want as far as services go. We give them current pricing. We set it up. We help them uh, get all the resources in order. So we help, set up the necessary paperwork to pre-fund it.
Okay.
We make sure that it is Title 19 compliant, again, whether or not they are going on
Yep.
Title 19, at least it's a protected asset from them, for them, from, the state and whatnot. That's what we do. When you get done meeting with me, there's an entire packet you will have, and it's typically our statement of goods and services, copy of the general price list from whichever funeral home that they wanted, the application for the funeral contract with the insurance policy. And again, we break that up. There's typically two because we'll break it up to be Title 19 compliant.
Okay.
In the state, with those regulations, irrevocable assignment, you're allowed an irrevocable and revocable contract. The irrevocable is capped at 10,000. The revocable, you know this already,
No, 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 but this
but
is great information.
of course, yeah,
Yeah.
the revocable is, burial space items, so there is no cap on that. And then in addition, if they wanted, they could put up to a $1,500 insurance policy for a child or a spouse as a beneficiary. But we always try to do that, and so you would have those forms, the irrevocable assignment form, and then I go a state above, and I have families sign pretty much the state statute saying if it does go into Title 19 and there is any money left over, they understand that it would have to go back to the state.
Okay.
Um, if they're not on Title 19, it goes back to the family, so that's no problem whatsoever.
Yeah. And it sounds like from what how you're explaining it that just like our conversations around financial planning, estate planning, this is all wrapped together into one comprehensive plan where everyone should be working with each other, right? The financial advisor, the attorney, the funeral specialist, right? To create the most comprehensive, most efficient plan in general. Is that fair
Oh
to
yeah,
say?
definitely, yeah. And I mean, and that's one thing that we were talking about when we first met is
Yeah,
I always like to talk to the financial planners because it's an expense.
yeah, absolutely.
You should try to help your clients get prepared for that in the long run. And what I always say is take care of it now, sooner, while they have the funds to do so. Before, because my wife's grandparents are a prime example. He's 97. If you asked him now if he would be alive, he goes, I thought I would have been gone at 78, 80. It's just the same. It's an older generation. They didn't expect to live as long.
Yeah,
And, he set it up when he had the funds and now he has some assistance, but he wouldn't have been able to set it up now. So the earlier, the better. Also, too, because you could take advantage of that gain of interest on it.
yeah,
So I always say, I love working with financial planners. I love working with estate planners, Medicaid lawyers, all of that.
absolutely. So, as we're approaching the holiday season,
Yes.
how do you How do you have these conversations with family members? I mean, this is difficult for
Yes.
most of us. I don't know, any recommendations or positive experiences you've seen from clients of yours?
Yeah, I mean, what usually makes people realize this is if there is either a sudden passing in the family or a friend of theirs. I had a couple from Westport a while back. They came in because one of his sister, I believe, passed out of state, and it was just it was in shambles. And they said, you know what, we do not want to be dealing with that. So they just sat down and they told the kids, hey, look, when they come over they told me that they were going to tell the kids when they come over for dinner, hey, this is what it is. Don't worry about it. But if anything were to happen, that's it. COVID definitely had an impact on even just having that conversation. COVID really shifted the age, people pre-planning. It was typically more in the late 70s, early 80s. On average now it's about, or late 60s, early 70s because
Wow.
people
That's a
realized,
shift.
yeah, because people realized, hey, look, it was devastating. Everybody knows somebody or, know of somebody who, unfortunately passed from it.
Yeah.
And it just makes people realize, unfortunately, we're not invincible as much as we like to think we are. And we're not going to live forever as much as we like to think we are. So it's always better to kind of just grab the bull by the horns and approach the subject. And, I've had it too where families wanted to do it, and then you get too many chefs in the kitchen, as I like to say. And
I thought you
all
were
the
going to say maybe too much wine, but that's
well, yeah, hey,
that too.
my great grandfather, my mother loves telling this story. He used to stand up every Christmas and go, in his broken Italian accent, hey, this is my last holiday. I love you all, and not for 20 years.
Been
And
going on
every
20
year
years.
it was okay, all right, yeah, okay.
Oh
And
oh my God.
and that was, of course, the homemade wine talking, but
Oh, homemade. Love it.
oh yes, yeah. I make homemade limoncello also, so
There you go.
family recipe. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's just one of those where you have to, you don't want the uncertainty.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, believe me, kids don't want to think about their parents passing, but it's eventually going to happen. And if you have a game plan to at least deal with it, where all you could say is, okay, mom passed, great, here's the packet. All I got to do is make a phone call to the funeral home she has listed on here, and all of her wishes are broken down and set. And it's funded. And now I don't have to worry about anything. I just have to go finalize a date and a time,
Yeah.
order the flowers if, she didn't already pick that, and we're good to go.
Okay.
I could focus on grieving and
Grieving.
love.
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely. Okay. And what about government programs, grants, anything there that you can talk about as it relates to this conversation?
Yeah. So, I mean, as far as the state goes or any government programs, they they have a thing in Connecticut. It's only really for indigent people, who don't have anybody. They're, homeless. It's a very low amount. And if you
Okay.
have any sort of finances, that gets subtracted from that amount, and then the
Okay.
family ends up having to pay. So as far as that, that's really all I know. We do. A gentleman in my group, he, myself, he's helping me learn it, but there is a VA program. It's kind of like a VA pension program
Okay.
where
Wow.
it helps people. It's not for end of life per se, but it would more so help them stay in their homes to get necessary care.
Okay.
So it keeps them, they could stay in their homes longer before going into the nursing home. And this way it helps with my wife's grandfather is on it.
Got it.
You can get a husband and wife if, as long as the husband was a veteran within a certain time frame, had a less amount of assets, because there is
Okay.
an asset cap that they look at. But we always, we come in, we take a look at everything. It's a tedious, long step.
Really imagine.
Um,
Yeah.
but and it usually start to finish takes anywhere from 6 to 8 months.
Okay.
But once, we look at it and we determine, we have a lawyer. We look at it and see if everything looks good and this is going to pretty much be a home run and they'll get this, then we move forward with it. If there's any doubt, we don't want to waste anybody's time,
Okay.
and do that. We do charge a fee if it does move forward all the way through, just for handling all the paperwork, because you got to make sure all your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed. Because if not, it's the government we're dealing with. They'll kick it back, and good luck trying again.
Absolutely.
Um,
Okay.
so that's more that's not necessarily end of life, as far as funerals go, but that's more of just people who need assistance while they're at home.
Absolutely. And is
Yeah.
that VA program, is that through the VA nationally or is that a state run program?
No, it goes all the way down to Washington, and I
Okay.
have some information on that if anyone would like to. There's a whole packet that I have that kind of it's the guideline and even the flyers with
Okay.
that. I can send you kind of like a PDF version of it.
No, that's great. Thank you. Did I miss anything?
I always tell people, the sooner you get it done, the better, just because you have more time for it to grow. And, the beauty of it, just one thing I wanted to cover regarding setting it up, the reason why it's set up third party, a little joke I say to all my families,
Oh, yeah.
if they hit the lottery and they said, hey, we're leaving and going to Florida or going to Italy, this is a protected asset. When we use these, the funeral specific insurance, it's a protected asset and it will follow you wherever you go. So if you wanted to say, all right, I'm going to be buried in Florida now, I'm
Yeah.
not going up there, we
That's
just simply transfer it. It's a real quick phone call and we just simply transfer it down to a funeral home down there and sign it over, and that's that. It's real simple. The other side of that coin, I always joke, is if, say, all of a sudden, for example, here, Spear Miller, if Dick Miller hits the lottery and says, I'm going to Florida, I'm
yeah.
closing up shop, and that's it. The families who have everything set
Yeah.
can up and transfer it anywhere they go. That money does not get dissolved with the business or anything like that. It is a protected
Okay.
asset. So
That's important.
that's
Yeah.
yeah. So it's protected from the state. It's protected, in case they go on Title 19, the state can't touch that money because it's set up specifically for funeral, their funeral wishes.
Yeah.
And there is quite a list of things that we could put on there as long as they're funeral specific and going towards that person's funeral that day.
Okay.
There is things you could put on there, flowers. If there's you have a loved one flying in, you could even, for the funeral, and they could prove that they're coming for the funeral. You could, get some reimbursement from that. You could pay for that ahead of time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's more flexible than I realized.
Yeah. So here's the thing about Connecticut. Every county is different.
Okay.
Um, when it comes to these Title 19 requirements. But the nice thing is that so long as it's set up correctly the first time,
Mhm.
it's usually never an issue.
Why they need a
Um,
specialist.
exactly.
Yeah.
Because what a lot of times, sometimes you have extra money left over if they're on Title 19. They say, okay, now let's start using it for that. The state goes, well, no, 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 no. It wasn't originally set up that way.
Right.
So that's why it's good to set it up ahead of time. And, there is a great, Medicaid Title 19 lawyer that we, reference with quite often just to be like, hey, how's this? Hey, is this
Yeah.
everything he's given us the green light on is, what we do. So he knows the laws inside and out when it comes to that side of things. But
Absolutely.
yeah,
Another example of utilizing the resources and sharing it to benefit the client. So,
of course. Of course. I'm sure, as you said, first time you're having a, funeral specialist and,
yeah.
on a wealth podcast, but a lot of people, it's part of life and you got to take care of it. So,
Absolutely. Yep.
yeah,
And exactly to the point that we kind of kicked off with is tends to happen when we least expect it, least want it. It's a disruption, and it's more than anything, it's an emotional grievance that you're going through. It's hard to focus
correct. Yeah,
most. So
no, definitely.
so Brian, you are licensed in Connecticut and Mass, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So I have my funeral directing license in Connecticut. And then I have my life insurance license in Connecticut and Massachusetts.
Okay. And if anyone wanted to reach out to you in regards to questions or follow-ups, what's the best way to reach out to you?
I would honestly say my email
Okay.
or my cell phone. To be completely honest, I get texts all,
Wow, look at you.
so yeah. I trust people with my cell phone.
Well, what I can do is I can put your email and cell in the short show notes if you'd like.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay, I'll
Yeah.
do that and really appreciate the insight that you have. And I know that this will be a topic of interest for a lot of individuals because we have these conversations all the time with our clients, so it's important.
Oh yeah. No, without a doubt. Again, it's not something you want to talk about, but it's something you have to talk about.
Yep. I'm gonna consider it myself as the holidays approach. So
Yeah. And always that's always usually a good time because that's when the family's together.
I might have to get your homemade wine though for this. I don't know.
Well, so the homemade wine, I don't know that recipe. My great uncle has it. He's got to teach me. He's 87, so he has the notes written down. They're on a piece of paper, written in pencil. They're on a nail in his rafter in his basement, so I know where they are.
Okay.
But I could get you some homemade limoncello. That is my great grandparents came from Amalfi and Minori, and my grandfather's side was Positano.
Wow.
And my great uncle brought the recipe over, the limoncello recipe over when he came over in, I think it was 68. And then it was tweaked a little bit to accommodate for the Italian lemons. They're the size of grapefruit. The ones in America are a lot smaller, so we had to tweak it a little bit. But it's a homemade recipe, and I've everyone's told me it's exactly like having it over there. So
It's probably a heck of a lot better than the last homemade wine I had, which was in my hometown in New Jersey. Someone that I went to school with, father made it, and
okay,
it was made in the basement in New Jersey.
yeah, no,
So,
yeah, the wine could be a little tough. I remember my great uncle would make it. It would like 18%, so it was potent. The limoncello is a lot smoother, and you can sip it. You can mix it with iced tea to make a nice Arnold Palmer in the summer, and
the things I learned with this podcast, I love
yeah,
it. Well,
yeah.
thank you, Brian. We
Well,
appreciate
thank you for having me on. Yes.